Can you all see that?
Let me say welcome to any of you who are watching us live this afternoon, but also a word of greeting and welcome to those who are going to be watching this recording later. Thank you for being a part of continuing the conversation. I am Dr. John Roebuck. I work here at Belmont. I direct the Reverend Charlie Curb Center for Faith Leadership. But from time to time, I am honored and happy to do some work with University Ministries, and I'm grateful for the invitation today to kind of moderate a conversation that we're going to have for the next 30, 45 minutes or so. And today, specifically, we're going to be talking about the impact that Black church has on its community or on its city. And some of you may have watched an earlier lecture, chapel lecture, given a couple of weeks ago by Dr. John Faison. Dr. Faison pastors Walnut Grove Missionary Church down the street here from Belmont, one of our trustees, and a gifted speaker, and did a beautiful job in his presentation. So this conversation is a continuation, sort of a follow-up to that. And so I will be referring a couple of times to some of the remarks that he made. I'm going to ask our panelists today to kind of respond to that. But mostly today, I want to leave some opportunity for you to have questions answered, and some questions I have that I want these guys to answer in terms of how they see their role, both in a prophetic role of preaching, but also what is it to really lead a congregation to engage its community, and how has that historically happened in Black space and in Black America, and what does it look like, and how is that different maybe even from way white churches have done that. So I welcome you today. We have two distinguished guests that I'm delighted to introduce to you. One is Reverend Dwayne Lewis. Dwayne is the pastor of New Season Church here in Nashville. The other is Dr. Roosevelt Walker. Roosevelt is pastor of Faith United Missionary Baptist Church. I have a privilege of knowing both these gentlemen. I've actually known Roosevelt almost for 2 decades now. When I first came to Nashville and I was pastoring Woodmont Baptist Church, Roosevelt was doing student ministry work through the local Baptist Association, and I got to be on some committees with him, and so I have enjoyed that connection. But currently, I am working with both of these pastors in a project called Project Thrive, and we're helping some local churches rethink what it is to thrive in the context of our culture and the age and day in which we live. And so these are friends, and I'm grateful that I have a chance to rub shoulders with them even today. So I want to take a minute. I'm going to ask each one, if they will, just tell us a brief word about your congregation and its composition, its makeup, and then help us to understand a little bit of the context in which your church is placed. Help us to know a little bit more about your particular setting, your neighborhood. And so, Dwayne, let me begin with you. You'll need to unmute if you've not already done so, and tell us a little bit about your work and your church, if you will.
Well, thank you, John. It's a joy to be here with you guys. And, we are in the Bordeaux area, north of Nashville, New Season Church. We're about maybe 5% Anglo church, and the rest is African-American. And our community that we're in here in this North Nashville area is a very mixed community. And it's steady more growing right now. There's new building going around us within the 2-mile radius or 3-mile radius. There's a lot of new buildings going up right now, new communities. So we're excited about that. We've been here in this building here for 5 years. 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Yeah, 5 years. So we're excited about that, being in this community. We prayed about being in this community. I grew up in the Bordeaux area. So to be able to be here to serve these households, these families, it's been a blessing for us.
Let me just ask you one question in terms of that local demographic. You said that you live in a mixed community. Give us a little bit of the demographic of the community itself.
Well, it's mostly African-American, and I don't have those exact numbers in front of me, but it's mostly African-American. And as you go over, we call it over the railroad tracks into the County Hospital Road area, on that side, it's predominantly African-American. But here on this side, this northern side here, it's the older homes where right here, Clarksville Pike, so in Ashland City Highway. So it's more of the Anglo from that perspective.
Okay. And you said that there's some new investments, some new businesses and buildings being built in that area. And primarily what kind of businesses are moving into that area?
Well, you have the Metro Center area that's right over there by the Titan Stadium. And then we have new apartments, I guess lofts that they're building here on Clarksville Pike. They've built another community will house about 200 people just right over here on County Hospital Road. So most of it is living quarters, homes and apartments. Residential they're building right over here within a 3-mile radius of our church.
Okay, interesting. Roosevelt, tell us a little bit about Faith United Missionary Church.
First of all, let me say I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. Thanks for the invite. I will say that our church has been in existence since 1974. So this year, around about March, we'll celebrate 47 years of existence. Our church, like Dwayne's church, New Season, is in North Nashville, to be exact, Northeast Nashville, right off the intersection of Briley Parkway and Whites Creek Pike. If you're familiar with the big UPS terminal there, we're just a mile south or so of that location. And I will say, with respect to the community that Dwayne talked about, one of the things about North Nashville, the Bordeaux area, and by the way, we're about 3 miles from, our church is about 3 miles from Dwayne's church. So we share, obviously, that community, that space. But one thing about North Nashville historically is that it has enjoyed the highest, concentration of African Americans, in and around the city. Not necessarily, I'm not saying necessarily in terms of just sheer numbers, but in terms of just saturation and concentration of African Americans. Historically, certainly that space has been that. And Dwayne is correct. I mean, we're in the midst of, as a matter of fact, I was on a call last night with our folks, and one of the things that came up is the reality that, call it what you will, gentrification, et cetera, economic expansion, all that kind of stuff, it has intensified. And quite frankly, COVID-19 just slowed it down. It will be interesting come, say, summertime, certainly the latter part of this year, how quickly that picks up. I anticipate it will accelerate and all of that. And so that will be one of the challenges going forward that we'll have to contend with, along with New Seasons and all of that. So that's a little bit about who we are.
Tell us a little bit about the composition of your congregation itself.
Yeah.
It racially mixed at all?
Yeah, thank you,
Who's
John.
in your church? Yeah.
Yeah, the church, our church is primarily overwhelmingly African American. It has been that way since its inception. Yeah, so overwhelmingly African American.
And you've been pastoring there how long?
16 years almost.
16 years.
Yes.
Wow, time gets away, doesn't it?
It does, man.
Good. Well, thank you guys for that bit of an introduction. Let me kind of pivot for a minute and talk about some things that Dr. Faison said in terms of the role of Black church and community. And a couple of places I want to stop and ask you guys to respond to it and just to reflect and say, yeah, that's correct in our understanding, in our own tradition, but also in the history we have with the churches we're serving. He said an interesting thing. He said that the Black church is not defined by worship style or location or building design. He said it is formed out of historical, religious, racial, and social experiences. What would you say about that? I mean, I think sometimes when we talk about the difference between white church and Black church, we say, well, Black church is going to go on for 2 hours. White church gets out in time to beat the Methodists to the restaurants, right? So there are cultural differences and there are styles in worship and all of that. And those are all extremely important. But how would you kind of respond to that? How is the Black church defined in your mind, especially here in America?
Well, I will. One of the things that caught my attention that John also said was that the Black church is more a Black space than Black place, and I certainly would agree with that. I think that's true because overwhelmingly so. One of the noted sociologists from way back in the day, Fraser, E. Franklin Fraser, said that the Black church served as a refuge for African Americans in a hostile world. And so, to John's point, John did a very good job. John Faison did a very good job of elaborating on that and talking about that. So that is very, very true. It is where that expression is allowed to be expressed. It is where, as Fraser even said, pent up emotions and all of that is allowed to be expressed. One of the things that I have believed for a long, long time, particularly now having had the opportunity to pastor now for about 16 years, been in ministry altogether for 30 years. I was reared in the African American church, in a rural African American church. I've had experience obviously in inner city churches, which our church is here and in other places. And one of the things that the African American church has not had the luxury of that white churches have is that we've never had the luxury of being able to solely concentrate, if you will, much of our energy on the gospel itself, because we've had to deal with all the social political dynamics, and of course the gospel certainly speaks to most of those issues, and so I would agree with John's assertion of the role of the Black church in that context.
And I concur with that as well. And historically speaking, as Pastor Walker is saying, it's been interesting for the Black church that we've always known God to be the way maker, right? So there's a whole nother level of spirituality that comes out of the Black church. You think about it that, if we had a white family, a white person just come to the Black church, well, like John, I tell you, so when you come to preach a new season now, you're going to have people that's going to raise their hand and say hallelujah, or they might tell you to preach or whatever. And you're going to see a demonstration because of an oppressed people. So even historically, we found that the church was that place to where families went, right? And when Sunday came, they were able to release a lot of things that bothered them throughout the week. That the church was the place where we got all the information that we needed for the community and what was going on. So when you talk about oppression and you talk about all the things that we're even dealing with today with this racial divide, we find that the church is the place we go to be able to find the strength And so sometimes people don't understand that, but we as African Americans, even as pastors, as leaders in churches, we've always only had that one man to really stand on, and that's God. And historically, when I go back, and even in my family, my grandmother was an evangelist, my grandfather was an evangelist. So in our family, I didn't realize there was so much Christianity there, or so many leaders in our family, but we found that the institution of the Black church has so much to offer. And I've discovered that when people of other races come to the Black church, they have a new experience. They find a new level of freedom, because that's the place where we find that freedom in the midst of our oppressions.
Very interesting. Roosevelt, I was interested in your comment about how the Black church experience has not been afforded an opportunity to concentrate solely on the gospel, because it has been such a part of the cultural places where Black America has stood. One of the things that John said, and I did pick up on that same quote you just mentioned about it's more of a space than a place, but he said the Black church has galvanized societal, economic, and political power. And then he said the Black church has been a launching pad for survival.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested in that. I think he's absolutely right. But I'm looking at it through my lens, and I want to hear it from you guys. What do you hear in that comment, that it has been the launching pad for survival for the Black community?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only survival, but also, I would say it this way, thrival, or the capacity to thrive. Its capability to thrive is also there. For instance, the Black church, I mean, my goodness, there are so many HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, who owe their start to the Black church. There are so many businesses, I'm talking about historically now, coming out of slavery, and especially going through Jim Crow, et cetera, or Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and all that kind of stuff. Businesses, arts, theater, all of that stuff, insurance companies, you name it, in terms of the Black community, they are owing to the African American church. There was simply no place in America where Blacks had any opportunity to experience those types of things, economic empowerment, all of that. I would even add to that emotional uplift than the Black church. That's just, so John is right, but not only just survival, but also in the African American community's opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, I know he talks. I want to talk in a few minutes about lament and celebration. I want to get to that, but I like that idea, Roosevelt, that it is not just survival, it's also where people went to thrive and where that still happens. Yeah. Dwayne, you want to respond to that comment about launching pad for survival?
Well, I agree with Pastor Walker. I mean, that was just perfect. He nailed it on the head right there. You know, and that's when you look at it, man, that's the launching pad. You know, it's the church. I mean, people, even now with this COVID, people are looking forward to coming back to church. You know, although the virtual has been okay, but it's nothing like being in the presence, because that's where all the relationships and all that began. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Dr. Faison talked a lot about that sense of the importance of community, and how coming together and being able to rub shoulders and shake hands and hug necks is such a vital part of everyone's church experience, but especially in the midst of a culture where people have been systemically oppressed, to say we need this because we need each other. It's kind of where we get our batteries recharged, right? So he does talk about it's very communal in nature. So one of the things he also talked about is the role of the Black church in terms of hospitality. And he made a really good point in which he said, you know, if you're white and you come into a Black church, you're going to be welcomed with open arms. Whereas if you're Black and you come into a white church, maybe not the same reception at all times, right? So could either one of you comment for a minute about your sense of hospitality that's demonstrated in the life of the average Black church?
Dwayne, I'll defer to you. I'll start.
Well, the experience in the Black church, man, and you're absolutely right. Pastor John was was right on it. And that's one of the things that we always have that response from people when they first come into the church, that is love, because in the Black church, once again, it's about family, it's about relationship. And we look forward to that. And when you come into that, we want people to feel loved, and we're intentional in that, in reaching out into new people that comes into the church. And it doesn't matter if you're Black or white. You know what's interesting though, John, is that in the Black church, as you said just a second ago, that in the Black church, everyone feels welcomed. And in the white church, and if I, as a Black man, to go into that setting, sometimes you don't feel that comfortable. Let me give you an example. I experienced literally, not 3 years ago, I went into a church that I know well, and people in there know me. And I went in and I sat kind of in the back, in the middle. And when I sat down, there was a gentleman who was white that was sitting there. I came in and everybody was speaking as I came in, but I sat down next to him. He literally got up, walked past me and went and sat in another seat. Now, the interesting thing was, I knew that did not represent that church. I knew that, but sometimes if you're not there, that right there will affect you in a very deep way. I knew that it was not the representation of that church. Well, and other members, the ushers, came up and said, listen, don't pay him an attention, that he does not represent us, and this, that, this, and that. But imagine if I was someone that said, okay, let me give this a try. Let's see what happens, how that would affect it. So, you know, it happens in the church, and that was unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, John said, and I couldn't agree with you more, Pastor Dwayne and John Faison. I mean, he said it very plainly that the Black church is also a welcoming place, and that certainly is true. Let me add another example to the whole
absolutely
discussion. As I mentioned a moment ago, our church is overwhelmingly African American. It is not a mixed church ethnically, racially. It is not. But we do have one white individual who serves as he serves as our guitarist. Everybody knows him. And I mention that because, you know what? If you were to talk to him, I think he would tell you that he, from the outset up until this very moment, he's been with us now for a couple of years. Matter of fact, there's another young lady. Yes, I stand corrected. It's him and another young lady. And if you were to speak to these people, I think they would tell you without any reservation that they have felt welcome from the time they stepped foot in the door. And I think a big part of that is for people who have historically been oppressed. Lord knows who better to know not to oppress. I mean, it's just obvious. And so, but those folks, I believe, would say that. So yes, I do believe that it is generally true that you will find a much more welcoming space and place in African-American communities, in African-American churches than you would outside that context, for those reasons and then some.
Do either one of you think there is is there a deep-seated sense of distrust? You know, like, oh, here's a white guy in our church. Why is he here? Is he going to try to straighten us out? Is he going to try to give us advice and counsel?
No, I don't sense anything like that.
No.
Good.
No. It doesn't typically start there.
No. You know, because I'm trying to be really conscious, and even in my own life and heart, where I tend to say to everyone I can, if you don't have Black friends, you need to make Black friends. And I say that not to build a tokenism, to say, oh, you need to check it off. You need to have Black friends and Chinese friends. But I think we desperately need each other's perspective and wisdom and understanding. There's so much that we can gain if we will create space for that to happen. And so I love that sense of welcome, and the fact that both of you have affirmed very clearly that whoever walks in the door of your house, that's God's house. It's not your house. It's like you're welcome here, and we hope you can worship and be a part of who we are. Dr. Faison also talks a little bit in his talk about lament and celebration. And just chase those rabbits for a minute, if you will. How does Black church see lament and its role in ministry? And then also, what are some examples of how Black church provides celebration beyond just things that would normally be associated with the church, but maybe even community-wide celebrations that need to happen from time to time? So lament and celebration.
Go ahead, Dr. Walker.
Yeah, well, I alluded to it earlier when I said that, people ages ago, sociologists, people who study religion with respect to African Americans and all that kind of stuff, they've told us time and time again that the church for African American people represents a place of refuge from hostility. And so lament then takes center stage. It's just no question about that. That is not to say, and it would be unwise, downright foolish to say that everyone expresses themselves in the exact same way. It is not a monolithic expression, but it is that we have this safe space where people can truly lament from the pain, the oppression, the sense of oppression, whatever it may be, et cetera, leading to, of course, celebrations. Celebrations in the African-American church could be as simple as, sharing a meal together. Say, for instance, a church anniversary. We tend to celebrate church anniversaries. That means we bring in a guest preacher or speaker. We may design the service that day differently to have other components that we don't typically have. And for certain, after that, it is planned that we have a meal together. And from the start of worship to the time people leave the fellowship hall from eating, it is an opportunity to celebrate and express, the goodness of God. And so something as simple as sitting down around the meal table, 100 or so, however many people, is an example of how that celebratory tone continues or finds expression.
Again, Dr. Walker, I agree, and that's their place where we call it that relational space, and we have that relational space where we continue to grow together. And in the Black church is that celebration is just a very foundational part. Again, scarcity and oppression is nothing new to the Black church. So when we have that opportunity to celebrate someone or something, we would do it and kind of do it at its biggest heights from that perspective. So yeah.
I have a good friend. He actually passed away this past year, but was a dear friend and a mentor to me in ministry, and a white individual, and lived in Birmingham and joined 16th Street, the historic church there, just because he wanted to know more than his own world. And he called me one day, and he was so excited about the worship service they had. He said, you know what they did? He said, they made every student, from first grade to 12th grade, bring their report cards to worship. And they brought them down to the front, and the church celebrated every A and every B and every passing grade these students made. Mm-hmm. And I thought, what a wonderful idea, right? To have thought, we want to celebrate the whole person. It's not just we want to celebrate what Jesus has done in your life to bring you salvation. Absolutely celebrate that. But we want to celebrate every good step that you've taken and every positive thing in your life. So just an amazing thing. I want to remind people who are watching us live that if you have questions or comments that you want to make, if you'll put them in the chat, those are going to get fed to us, and we'll try to look at those in a few minutes. But I want to turn now away from Dr. Faison's thoughts just to some questions that I want to pose to these two gentlemen about how their church impacts their city or their community. And there's some hot topics that we might bring out for a minute. One of them is, I know historically there has been a really important concern in Black church life for the health and well-being of individuals, to the point of even doing health clinics and that sort of thing. It is also my understanding, and I can certainly be corrected on this, but there is a little bit of hesitancy and a little bit of fear in the African-American community right now about COVID shots. And I'm just curious if you have felt that bubble up, and what are you doing as a mentor or as a role model to help push that health initiative? And is that something that you would be involved in as a church, to say to people, hey, go get those shots when you get the opportunity? What would you say about that?
Well, first of all, I will say this. that whole that whole notion, the notion that there is a distrust of the medical mental health even establishment is a historical nuance. It's rooted. It is rooted in historic systemic racism. That's just the bottom line.
There's a reason for that, right?
There's a reason for that.
That's a real fear and an understandable fear.
Yeah. Now that said, to your question, John, for our congregation, the longer this has went on, that is COVID-19, and now the vaccine is out, we've had people in our congregation. As a matter of fact, the first one in our congregation who received a shot was one of our older saints, a lady who, her and her husband, in their 70s. She was not reluctant. She was not reticent, anything like that. I mean, she went, she got the shot. And so, at least for our people, I can say that there's not a whole lot of reservation about it. I don't anticipate that there will be. And I'll tell you one, to be very honest with you, and certainly this is not a conversation about politics, but one reason for that has been the change in administration, to be very frank with you. And so I don't anticipate going forward that that's going to be much of an issue for our people by and large.
And I agree with our congregation the same. We've had a number of, I think about 5 or 6 people that have taken the shot already, and they've been fine. And it's interesting because people want to ask them questions. How you feeling? From week after week, week to week, they want to ask how you feeling, because there was that level of concern. And I think that I agree with Dr. Walker that with the change of administration, it made a difference. And just what you hear from in social media, you hear it not just in the church, but in the community, in the grocery store. Well, I'm gonna wait and see how many other people take the vaccine and then see how it turns out for them. So you're gonna hear that. But for our congregation, and even for me personally, when my time comes to get it, I'm going to get it. I mean, it is what it is. And
let me just ask out of curiosity though, you guys are 3 miles apart, you said, something like that. Mm-hmm. How far do people in your area have to travel to get that shot? Is there local access to that, or is it they got to come all the way downtown? What's got to happen?
Well, I can tell you, I will say that with the couple, the older couple who, at least I got first wind of someone in our church gaining the vaccine, they did it in Meharry.
Right.
So that's, 4 miles.
Yeah.
The other gentleman, veteran, I think too, it may have been Meharry. Or at the VA, perhaps even the VA, being a veteran. So, I mean, not terribly far, at least by that standard.
Right.
Okay. Someone has asked a question. It may be a good chance to just go ahead and insert it into this. Although I just got a note saying that someone else is going to ask that in a minute. So anyway, I'll get back on track for myself then. You talk about politics, and you talk about, a new administration, and for many people, a glad situation, a better, a more hopeful time. But talk for a minute about the role of the Black church in terms of politics, local politics, and also voter registration and turning out to vote and things like that. Why has that been such an important part, you think, of your historic tradition in terms of getting that out?
Yeah. Well, one is because that's where organizationally you have historically found most Black folk. Number one, where are they? At church. Where? Sunday. Well, going back even further, from the time I was a kid and back before, and certainly Dwayne can attest to this, it wasn't just Sunday, it was through the week. And so that's where you could find them. They were readily accessible. You didn't have to look 10, 20 different places. Just go to the church, and there they were. And then, as we said a moment ago, it was embodied in the church. It was central. It was concentrated in the church. Not only the location of Blacks, but also their sense of enfranchisement or empowerment. And so my goodness, the Black church has not just produced outstanding preachers and pastors, but the truth of the matter is it has produced outstanding politicians and performers and artists and business personnel, you name it. And so that is why that when it comes to politics, even to this very day, candidates, they frequent. I mean, during the last election cycle in our church, we had, Lord knows, I don't know how many candidates come through. And I have the standing practice, it is not my responsibility to get you elected, but what I will do is I will allow you, space in the lobby to meet and greet people, that sort of thing. And so it's just historically been there for those reasons, I do believe. And Dwayne, you might want to add some other aspects.
No, yeah, I mean, likewise, and for us, we don't do the voting at our church, or I've had a couple of politicians come through, but when you think of this thing historically, and why the Black church standing so strong with voting and the whole politics is, man, look at where we came from. Look at one of the things that Dr. King and Rosa Parks and all these others John Lewis and all these others had done back then, and that was voting. And so that's one of the biggest things that we have to stand on, for whatever side you're on, you're Democratic or if you're Republican, whatever. But the bottom line is we want everybody to have a voice, right? And in the Black community, we realize how powerful, watch this, how powerful we are. And we're that powerful when we come together in whatever element that may be, whether it's in the school system, whether it's just voting, if it's, just whatever. But there's a strong power in the Black community. When we look at the monies that Black Americans spend, billions of dollars, if we channel that money in the right direction, right? But we as a church we find ourselves as the rotor that's leading a ship in a right direction, and that right direction is Christ. That right direction is Christ.
Yeah.
And we're doing it with honesty.
And John, if I could, I would also add to that, another primary reason for that is because, again, historically, the Black church, especially going back, the further you go back, the more you will see this, the Black church tended to represent the place where you found your most educated personnel.
Yeah.
And even if they couldn't read and write, they could give voice to the issue, and they were respected for that, preachers and the like. And so again, historically and uniquely, the Black church represents that still.
I was curious, so much in this past election back in the fall, how much voter suppression still takes place, especially that's obviously part of systemic racism, right? And just wondering, how have you sensed that even in your community? Do you feel like people have the opportunity to vote and to cast their vote in a free and just way, or is there a sense of suppression?
Well, if it is, I didn't feel it this election cycle. Man, I tell you, and I voted over at the Bordeaux Library. Dwayne is quite well familiar with it. You may have voted there as well. In early voting is when I voted, and I'm telling you, man, they were running people out of there the way they had to set up, and it just, I walked in and out in about 15, 20 minutes. Yeah. And I'm just speaking, of course, for myself, but just from what I saw and witnessed, and certainly with our church, which is what you're asking, our people, I must say, our people haven't spoke negatively about their experiences voting. So with that crowd, I would have to say absolutely no.
Okay.
I concur with that. I hadn't heard anyone feeling intimidated or anything of that nature when it came to voting. They just knew that they would just get out and have a voice.
Yeah. Let me say, John, one of our older members, she perhaps is the oldest now. She is 91 years old. Just a week or so ago, we funeralized the oldest at 95, but she is now the oldest, 91 years old, born and raised down in Pulaski. I think that's what, Lawrence County, whatever it is. Anyway, the area of the KKK, and where it got its inception. Anyway, she voted in the exact same place. And oh my goodness, she was just so excited and elated in explaining how quickly it happened. She did not suggest not one. This is from a 91-year-old.
Yeah.
who could not vote at one time.
Yeah.
And so no, I can't say that for our church. No. And you heard Dwayne
Yeah.
agree.
So we've got a number of questions that come in from folks who are watching us today, and I want to get to several of those if we can. And so let me just work through one or two of them with you. One of the questions is, how would you describe the Black church's response to racial injustices this past summer, as well as responses to the pandemic? How would you respond to how the church has responded to the racial injustices of the past summer, particularly with some of the Black Lives Matter rallies and things like that?
You know, for me, just at our church and Dylan, we have a younger crowd, and you know, in the 30s and 20s year olds, and you know, right in the 20s and 40s. And the thing for them was not about violence, but it was still about standing to have a voice, to understand the importance of being Black and having a voice, and want everybody to know that. It was a protest, and it was about justice. So when it came to that, there was not anyone, even my daughter, I have a daughter that goes to college, and she got down with, she walked that with the BLM. And I actually drove down there that day down here in Nashville, and I was on my way home, and I was driving it. So I found myself downtown, right there by the farmer's market. And I could see all these people, Black people, white people, young and old. I mean, I've seen people from the 60s, from the 50s, Black and white, walking. So in my mind, I'm saying to myself, look at God making a move with all these generations coming together for one cause to show the importance of humanity. Right. And so as I'm driving, I'm on my way home, and there was this energy, right, that caused me to park. I was talking to my wife on the phone. The energy was so strong, and I'm seeing people with tattoos. I'm seeing Black people, white people, people with long hair, short hair, purple hair, green hair, all walking together, talking with signs about just this one thing called humanity, life. And I sat there and I was talking to my wife, and I got out and I said, man, I got to see this. So I'm looking, and all I can see is people. Well, guess what ended up happening to me? Because of the energy of love, the energy of justice, I found myself, John and Dr. Walker, walking all the way from the Bicentennial Mall all the way downtown in this BLM march, and walking back in the rain. And I walked like it wasn't even raining. Why? Because there was a sense of love. And that's what you get in the church. And so for us, it wasn't about creating havoc or riots, but it was about having a voice to say, hey, listen, this is how things should be. And to see all those generations come together was a very powerful thing.
Yeah. And I would just simply add to that, in terms of how has the church responded. I believe it won racially, or in response to the racial unrest, painful, of course.
Sure.
But also, and this may come as a surprise to some to hear, but not surprised. Let me back up for a moment and add something else. Painful. Also, what's the word I'm looking for? We have to be honest about this. Also filled with a sense of rage. And I want to note, not out of control rage, but rage. Right. Not out of control rage, but rage. But the truth be told, not surprised. Not at all surprised. I snicker a little bit, although it's certainly not funny. I snicker a little bit because the notion of African Americans being enraged is not a new concept. It is 400 years old.
Sure.
And so that it just kind of stoked that sense of, underlying rage, painful, but not at all surprising, and consistent with what Pastor Dwayne said. We did much of the same. With respect to the pandemic, I'm not altogether at this juncture sure what to say, other than our people, dealt with it the best they could. Um, Unless you have, more specific questions to that, I'm
Yeah.
not sure how to respond to that question.
Let me, we're almost out of time and we've got a lot of questions. And let me just kind of sort of wrap up our conversation, say, well, there's two. I want to get to one question first. It said in a lot of white churches, there's almost a sense of competition between congregations. Is that true within the Black church community? Why or why not is that true? In other words, are you guys competitors or are you guys complementarians? How does that work in your world?
Well, I mean, who we're kidding? We find that everywhere.
Sure.
Who we're kidding? We find it everywhere to some degree. But by and large, no, we're not competing with each other. The sense of community is very important. The more of us together, the stronger the sense of community it is.
So you'd be glad to take Dwayne's members into your church.
Oh, man, and vice versa.
And I think that the other thing, even with that question, is that sometimes you do find that struggle when it comes to leaders actually working together, even in the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
You still find that stigma there, and it's a real deal thing that it happens. For some reason, it happens. Sometimes people just don't want a fellowship, and this is I think one of the things is, Dr. Walker, you help me with this, but it's all about this whole membership. As you just said, Don, it's just like, is this member going to go over here, go over there? But I think that it's all in the maturity and the mindset of the leader.
Yeah.
And I think that's just where it starts.
Yeah. And I would add to that. I think, given again, the African-American history of struggle and oppression in the country, I think coming out of all of that stuff, I think it lent itself to perhaps some sense of territorialism.
Yeah.
As you might imagine, not historically having this, having that, having access, having resources, underfunded, underserved, whatever. I think that just in general, and certainly in the context of African-American church circles, has contributed to that in some ways.
Sure.
That's why you don't see Black churches, for instance, consolidating, John. Churches dying and they just, they may be 2 feet apart and they won't consolidate, et cetera, et cetera.
That's true.
So one final question, and think about it for a moment. What's the one thing about your church that you're most proud of? One thing about your church that you are most proud of?
Wow.
Besides the preacher, I know you're proud of the preacher. He's a good guy, right? But what are you most proud of about your church?
Well, for me, it's the intentionality of reaching the community. Very intentional in that. For instance, right now today, when the tornado came, we partnered with the TBMB as well as the National Baptist Association, and was able to serve along with other churches, including Dr. Walker's church, and we were able to serve in our community. They were very intentional even now that we serve at our church. We serve in a community apartment complex to where we go and give 60 bags of groceries to 60 seniors. Every Wednesday, we give them groceries. Very intentional in that. When there's a need in the church, we had to get some front porch work done, and that was an expense there. So you let the people know. They were very intentional in meeting that expense. So for me, my heart, I'm just really excited about the intentionality that the people have to serve in our community.
Great. Thank you, Dwayne.
Mm-hmm. And I would just simply say, and I would just simply say, what I'm most proud of is that the church continues to be Christ-centered, Bible-centered. It may sound like a cliche, but it's just true. And I know Dwayne feels the same way. People-centered, and something that John Faison said that we talked about, that our church is a welcoming space. Mm-hmm. And I'm awfully proud of it. And quite frankly, over the last 16 years, we've had to build to that. It didn't happen overnight. And I'm not suggesting that it wasn't back before my tenure in time, but we've built on that increasingly over the years, and I'm mighty grateful for that.
Well, there is a lot of intentionality in ministry, and you guys do it very, very well. And I appreciate your heart, and I appreciate your time today. And so on behalf of University Ministries, I want to thank you again for giving us an hour of your time and letting us kind of pick your brain and helping us to have a little more perspective, a little more understanding. I'm going to turn it back over to Christy Ridings. She is going to tell students who are sharing the screen today what they need to do to get WellCore credit for our time together today.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Roebuck and Dr. Lewis and Dr. Walker. Thank you for being with us. Such great insights, and I'm just so grateful for all that you've shared with us. And also, I'm really grateful for the ways in which your congregation impact our city and our community. I'm just very grateful. Thank you, all of you who are joining us live. And if you are not joining us live, this will apply to you as well. If you're needing, those of you that are needing WellCore credit, if you can check the Blackboard site within probably 24 hours, there'll be a quiz that you'll need to complete to get your credit. But again, thank you all so much for this really important conversation. I'm grateful for you, and thank you again.
God bless.
Bless.